Today I'll be reading from Matthew chapter 16 verses 13 to 20. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone he was the Messiah.
Have you heard the good news? Jesus is in the business of transformation. My name is Ed Clark, and I'm on the team here at Lovechurch. And I'm also a student studying at Morelands Theology College, a local Bible college. Why are we together this morning? What level of expectation do we have to encounter Jesus? That's why we gather, right? That's why we read the Bible. That's why we open the Bible, to know him better, to encounter Jesus. And since Jesus is in the business of transformation, that should mean that we can all be changed. Well, that's the story I want to tell you today. It's the story of my own transformation in response to God's radical love. I came to you, Lovechurch, 3 years ago as a timid, scruffy-haired 18-year-old. Today, I come to you with a Tim Matthews signature haircut. When I came to you, I came full of excitement to be spending a year learning how to lead worship, to develop friendships, and to serve. But I also came extremely broken. I came hurting and confused. I came at the climax of my story. When I was at school in English, we used to draw out story mountains. When we wrote stories, you'd have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that was your basic story. And then when you got older, they added in action. The action becomes between your middle and your end, and it's the catalyst for moving the story forward. And it's the climax of my story. Now, I won't go into too much detail about my beginning. I will, however, pick it up at my defining moment, my action point. There was a moment in my life where my relationship with God became really real to me, where it went far beyond just knowing God and dabbling at relationship with him to becoming wholly dependent on him. I became really real with God when my parents went through a divorce. This was a time of extreme hurt and confusion for me. I couldn't understand why. Why was this happening to me? Why was it happening to my family? I was shook and hurt by my situation. And as it often is with these things, the effects begin to spiral much further than the initial shock. I began to stop eating. I made myself really ill. I began to cut myself off from other people. I lost my trust in others. I was so hurt and so confused, and I knew I had a choice to make. This was my defining moment. How do I trust God in all of this? Do I trust God in all of this? Do I turn to God or turn away from God? Well, that decision was pretty much made up for me. I had nowhere else to turn. I turned to God and I turned to worship. I worshipped my way out of confusion. Every day I'd come home after school and spend hours in worship, bringing my hurt and my confusion before God, coming as I was, blissfully broken before our God. As I began to encounter God and spend more time with him, I noticed that things began to change. I was able to comprehend and to process what was going on in my life. And with all my questions of who God was, he began to tell me who I was. I became established as a worshipper, as a child of God, as one that is loved and one that Jesus came to save. I was not alone. Jesus is in the business of transformation, and I've seen that at play in my life. As I came to encounter Jesus, encounter and begin to understand who he is, I slowly began to understand who I was. As I encountered Jesus, I was transformed. Now, the Bible talks about transformation a lot. Romans 12:2 says this, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect." As we begin to set our mind on the things of God, as we encounter him, we are transformed and renewed. We come to life. We begin to show life in the way that we live. My experience has been that when you encounter Jesus, when you understand who he is, you also begin to understand who you are. You're not left in a state of confusion or mistaken identity. I became the me God made me to be. Now that's a tongue twister. I became the me God made me to be. I put my sin-damaged identity aside and gained a heavenly nourished one. There's a transaction of identity when we encounter Jesus. That transaction of identity can be seen in the passage we heard read earlier. Now, coming into this passage, the disciples had been on a long journey of encountering Jesus. As followers of Jesus, as disciples, they had seen the radical transforming love of Jesus in action. They had been called to follow this man they didn't know much about. They followed him as he ate with tax collectors and prostitutes, as he disobeyed the religious leaders, as he healed the sick, gave sight to the blind, and fed the hungry. They were encountering the person of Jesus. We then come to this passage, where there is now an awareness of what this encounter actually means. Jesus asks this question: "Who do you say I am?" That's the question of this passage. Do you know who I am? Do you know me? Have you encountered Jesus? That's the question that we're being asked here. Now, I think there are two answers we can give to this question. The first of which comes from our head, and the second comes from our heart. Jesus first asks, "Who do the people say the Son of Man is?" That's his first question. Who do the people say the Son of Man is? The response the disciples give to this question is this. And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." The disciples kind of missed the point of the question a little bit. The point Jesus was trying to get to was that he was the Son of God. But the disciples kind of missed that. Jesus was the one they had all been waiting for. Jesus was trying to reveal himself to the disciples, allowing them to encounter him. So Jesus asks the question again and rephrases a bit. Obviously, the disciples hadn't got it, so maybe I'll make it a bit simpler. Who do you say I am? And it's at this point that we see Simon Peter, one of the disciples, take one of the most difficult journeys known to man, the 18-inch journey from your head to your heart. Simon Peter engages his heart and responds to Jesus. Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." That's his declaration, that you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. In this instance, Simon Peter has encountered Jesus. He becomes aware of who Jesus is, and as he does, he declares with his lips the truth of the one he has come to know. He encounters Jesus. And as this encounter takes place, Jesus responds with this. Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gate of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." As Simon Peter declares who Jesus is, Jesus in return declares who Simon Peter is. There is a transaction of identity. Who am I? You're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And you, Peter, will be the rock on which I build my church. You see that transaction there. As Simon Peter encounters Jesus, he is transformed through relationship. He knows who he is. He is transformed. Identity is revealed. He becomes Peter, the rock. What a name! He'll be given keys to the kingdom. He'll have authority. Jesus is in the business of transformation. And it's no coincidence that this is done in the context of worship. In fact, that word worship in English is taken to mean worth skip. It's giving worth towards something. In the passage we read earlier, that is what's taking place. Simon Peter is worshipping Jesus, giving him worth. And as he does, he encounters who Jesus really is. We encounter Jesus by worshipping him, by ascribing worth to him. That is simply what worship is, telling God who he is. And as we do that, he tells us who we are. Well, that's just how great our God is. As we worship him, as we praise and glorify him for who he is so generous to us that he tells us who we are in return. God loves to tell us who we are, to give us our identity in him. Now, this is not to say that we worship for that reason. We don't worship to be transformed or to learn more about ourselves. We worship because he alone is worthy of our worship. Worship is only to him. But it's a beautiful exchange that happens when we worship him. It's a nice side effect that God generously tells us who we are and establishes our identity in him. So, how do we respond to this truth? Well, last week, Tom gave us 6 things. I'm going to stick to 3. I think that's probably my level. Number 1, get to know Jesus. Really get to know him. It's from knowing Jesus that we encounter him. Wow, that was a really quick one. Yeah, get to know Jesus. Here's a longer one. As we get to know Jesus, let Jesus transform you. You may be watching and listening to this and yearning to know who you are, to know your identity, your place, your purpose. That is a question we all ask at some point. And it's a question that is answered by encountering Jesus. Encounter Jesus. Get to know him. Let Jesus' radical love transform you. Finally, this business, the business of transformation, is a family business. It's what we're all called to be a part of. Something that as believers of Jesus, we all become a part of. Once we encounter Jesus, the gospel, the good news, we become part of the story. We become storytellers. We become transformers. Has anyone seen that movie? Transformers have an amazing catchphrase as they go into battle. Autobots, roll out. Church, go into the nations and preach the gospel. Doesn't have the same ring to it, but it does have the same emphasis. And it's to go, to take your story of good news, of encountering Jesus, of transformation, and to tell others. Become a storyteller. Play your part in the business of transformation. Amen.